Hey everybody! Well, 2024 has wrapped up, and now it's time for the obligatory best and worst lists from all of your favorite YouTubers. Rather than a top 10, I'm just going to rank every horror film I watched last year. My basic criteria is that the film had to either have a wide release in theaters or a release on video streaming. Release dates are always kind of squishy, but if a film technically released in some film festival in 2023, but got a wide release on a streamer like Shudder or something in 2024, I'm just going to count it. Now, the only thing with my list is that I'm ranking these based on my personal favorites rather than what is objectively good. So if you see your favorite film buried at the bottom of my list, don't whine about it because this list reflects my personal tastes and not yours. Now, some films I've shifted my opinion on over time, so some may not reflect the immediate reviews we've given here on Outpost Unknown. And that's the thing with film. You're allowed to change your immediate feelings and your mind on something. That is okay. Now, this will also serve as kind of a micro review for a lot of these films, and I'll try to avoid any major spoilers, especially the ones at the very top tiers. But all bets are off for some of them, so you have been warned. Before I get into it, there were a few well-reviewed horror films or ones that friends of mine recommended I check out that I just wasn't able to because either they had no theatrical release near me or I just don't have the streaming service that they're on. Some of those films include Strange Darling, I Saw the TV Glow, Lisa Frankenstein, Y2K, Beetlejuice, and Red Rooms. So you won't see those here. I am but one person and I can't see everything. If I did miss something good, put it in the comment section down below. I also avoided some of the universally agreed shit-ass films like Netflix's Afraid because I'm not going to watch every piece of trash just to include it on a year-end list. But again, if there was a 2024 horror film you think has some merit that isn't on the list that I should see, leave that comment down below and I'll be sure to check it out. Overall, I think 2024 was pretty great for horror. Most of the stuff I saw I thought was at least alright, if not great. I'll try to keep my thoughts fairly short on each film, but I saw a lot of them, 46 to be exact, so this is going to be a long video. Buckle up. With that being said, let's get into it, starting with the absolute worst and working our way up to the absolute best. Number 46, The Mousetrap. Easily the worst horror film I saw this year. This one is about a group of teens celebrating a birthday in a Dave & Buster's type amusement arcade when the owner decides to watch Steamboat Willie for some reason, and by watching it, it somehow causes Mickey Mouse to come to life and start murdering everyone. There really isn't anything redeeming about this film. I guess if someone were to press me, I was like, it looks nice. The cinematography is fine. But the acting is god-awful. In the first hour, all the kills take place off-screen. When you eventually do see kills, CG blood all over the place. It's pretty devoid of creativeness. The characters literally have to say they have no idea why Mickey Mouse can literally teleport around them. Nothing is explained. The film only exists to try and bilk viewers out of money to capitalize on Steamboat Willie going into the public domain. Avoid this one. The Mousetrap, terrible. Number 45, The Strangers, Chapter 1. This film was already going to have an uphill climb for me because I thought the original Strangers film sucked, even though many people well-regard it. It's a very well-regarded film. But now the filmmakers are trying to sell me on the first part of a new prequel trilogy where we're supposed to learn about the Strangers from the first film. To me, it seems like it defeats the entire point because they're strangers. Why would I want to learn about their backstory? Don't know. I saw this with a buddy of mine, found myself laughing through a lot of it. The characters in this make some of the dumbest decisions in any horror film this year. Absolutely terrible, and I'm going to hard pass on the next two films in this trilogy, but at least Madeline Petch is easy on the eyes, so it does have that going for it. Number 44, Night Swim. Do you guys remember a few years back when the Blumhouse name had A24-style credibility with the horror community? They seemed to just put out good to banger-level quality films, and then something happened along the way, most notably the Halloween trilogy, and it all went awry. How this film about a demon-possessed swimming pool was greenlit, let alone given a theatrical release, is a total mystery. This film feels like it should be some low-budget thing you find scrolling the horror category of Tubi, and somehow Wyatt Russell and Kerry Condon got conned by Blumhouse into being in this. I suppose if it has anything going for it, it would be that viewers who are afraid of swimming might get a bit of anxiety from some of the pool scenes. You know, I can see that phobia of drowning being something that can impact somebody. But this is one of those films that could have been really cool had any thought gone into the script at all. None was given. Avoid Night Swim. Another big thumbs down from a Blumhouse film. Ruining your reputation, guys. Just putting it through the ringer. Number 43, Tarot. Of all the streaming services with 2024 horror film releases, Netflix is easily the worst. I don't think they had a single decent horror film that I saw anyway. Leave a comment if I missed something. And adding Tarot to their library didn't do them any favors. This is a PG-13 flick involving some college students who get a tarot reading from their friend via a very creepy deck. The monster drawings on each card then materialize and start murdering them one by one. Now, one thing I was really disappointed by with this film is how uninspired the monster designs were. They had an opportunity here to be really creative and decided to just shit out the most generic looking monster possible. You know, in a better person's hands, I could see this film having the same charm and staying power as something like the 13 Ghosts remake, which horror fans still have a fondness for because the ghost designs are really cool and it's just a batshit crazy film. But no, Tarot settles for staleness with an absolutely by-the-numbers plot, awful dialogue, and bad acting. Avoid Tarot, no good. Number 42, Time Cut. Netflix strikes again, this time with their version of the newly burgeoning time travel slasher subgenre. Now, Time Cut is basically the clearance rack version of Totally Killer, which was another time travel slasher put out by Amazon last year. In this one, a young girl finds a time travel device in a shed, which sends her back to 2003 rather than the 1980s. Once there, she must help her sister survive the Sweetly slasher and change the future. Now, this film trades the comedy and bloody kills of Totally Killer for like serious sister drama and bloodless kills in this. The killer's design looks really stupid, and it's pretty easy to figure out who the killer is almost immediately when, spoiler alert, a certain picked-on character is introduced. Gee, I wonder who the killer is going to end up being. Now, these time travel slasher films appear to be primarily for nostalgia and showing a horror view of a certain age. Oh, look, remember what kids used to dress like back in your day sort of vibes? But the thing about it is, like, kids didn't necessarily dress like this. You know, you walk down the hallway of a school, you don't see the most cliche, generic, nostalgia bait ideal of what an 80s person dressed like or, an early 2000s person dressed like. So it just looks weird. If you want to actually go see a cool time travel slasher film, go watch 2009's Triangle with Melissa George. That one is actually really cool and very underrated. Avoid Time Cut, not worth your time. Number 41, Maxine. Perhaps the first controversial entry on my list. I'm putting this here because of the sheer disappointment I felt after watching it. I love Ty West's X and especially Pearl, and this was probably my most anticipated horror film of 2024. It just totally fell on its face. Whereas X and Pearl had like really great performances by Mia Goth, she seems completely off in this one. Like, she doesn't have any idea what her character is supposed to be doing. I did not give a shit about anything that was going on with her character. The backdrop of the Night Stalker killings of the 80s could have been cool, but it isn't even really a focus. So I don't know if this was like a bait and switch from the marketing. Like, the marketing team they saw the finished film and they had no idea like how to actually market this. But this feels like Ty West just decided to expand these small intimate stories of X and Pearl that work so well into this big world with all of this extra stuff, bells and whistles and different things, that it just didn't land for me. I didn't want a film like this, and it just spoiled for me what could have been an all-time horror trilogy. Number 40, Invasive. Now, this flick is about a couple caterers who decide to hang out in a billionaire's house after he leaves to enjoy the 1% lifestyle. However, the billionaire comes back and kills a reporter, which is witnessed by the lead actress. Now, what ensues is a cat and mouse game as the billionaire tries to find her in his mansion. Now, this is one of those movies that isn't good, but it's good enough to have on in the background on a lazy Sunday when you're doing some spring cleaning. This guy playing the billionaire really chews the scenery, which can be fun, but not much happens in this film other than your standard cat and mouse sort of stuff, so don't go in and anticipating anything amazing. But I appreciated the effort here more than the execution. So, yeah, Invasive, not good, but worth keeping on in the background. Number 39, Immaculate. Now, 2024 was a huge year for religious-themed horror films, some of which you're going to hear about later on in this list. And this one got a lot of buzz because it was a passion project from Sydney Sweeney. She is the, hot young actress of the moment, and she plays a nun who has immaculately conceived a child. And the mystery of the film is how, why, and who or what is the child growing inside of her. This movie sucked, and Sydney Sweeney is bad in it. I don't think she's necessarily a bad actress. I know a lot of people dog on her for all kinds of horrible acting. I don't think she's bad, but in this, I don't think she was good. One of the problems is that this was released in a year with other films that do what it's trying to do, exponentially better. This movie is pretty short, so it does have that. Should be a good thing, but isn't in this case because it's like Sweeney gets knocked up and then it feels like she's immediately about to give birth. There's no meat to any of what's going on. And the last 10 minutes, that's kind of what was, hyped up about this movie. Probably the most overhyped, controversial scene I have ever seen. Maybe it's because I've seen so many horror films that show way, way worse, but I thought the last 10 minutes of this were really dumb, not nearly as impactful as the filmmakers want you to think it is. Maybe for a normie who would be like, oh my gosh, but yeah, the last 10 minutes, immaculate, avoid it. It's not that great. 38, Terrifier 3. All right, full disclosure, because I know a lot of people are probably already getting ready to pounce on me in the comments. Terrifier 3 at number 38 on your list. I don't like any of the Terrifier movies. I get it. Gorehounds blow their load every time one of these films comes out. However, I just don't like extreme gore stuff that doesn't have anything greater to say than, hey, check out my glorified FX reel, isn't it cool? And I really dislike gore that feels mean-spirited and only there to try and shock and gross out an audience. Look, the gore is impressive. Don't get me wrong. It's a feat of achievement of what they were able to do to make a lot of this gore stuff work. I fully acknowledge that. But I find these films so lacking in anything that I personally enjoy that it just feels boring to watch these things to me. Now, kudos to the director, Damien Leone, I think is his name, and his team for creating something super successful and breaking through into this cultural zeitgeist, especially with something so gory and kind of out of left field. Mad respect to him for all the success he's had on that, but these films just are not for me. Big thumbs down to Terrifier 3. Number 37, Don't Move. A film with a promising premise quickly runs out of steam in the Netflix film Don't Move. A woman depressed over the accidental death of her child plans to commit suicide when she encounters a stranger who speaks kindly to her, causing her to change her mind. Unfortunately, the stranger is a serial killer who shoots her up with a paralytic drug in order to take her back to his cabin and murder her. Now, what ensues over the next 70 minutes or so is a series of scenes in which our protagonist tries to find ways out of dire situations while unable to move, completely paralyzed. It sounds like an awesome premise, but it's kind of ruined by goofy decision-making and a really bad performance by the guy playing the killer. This guy was just so over-the-top ridiculous that it kind of brought the entire thing down. It felt like a Lifetime Channel movie if given a Netflix budget, if that makes any sense. Has a few good scenes in it here and there, so it's not a total failure, but not really worth watching when there are so many better horror films this year. Number 36, Mads. Now, people who know me know that I really, really hate zombies. As far as I'm concerned, everything that needed to be said about zombies was said in 1985 with Romero's Day of the Dead, finishing off that original trilogy, and Dan O'Bannon's Return of the Living Dead. And the only innovation since has been, let's make them run fast. Now, Mads attempts to do something new stylistically in that it is a 90-minute film shot in one continuous take. So the filmmakers apparently did 5 takes over 5 days and picked the best one. And you basically just follow 3 characters over the course of a night as they one by one become infected by some sort of zombie virus and start to turn. On a technical level, it's super impressive. Just thinking about everything it took to get a feature like this shot in one take with all the different locations and the camera movements and like camera moves through vehicles and all sorts of stuff. It's just fantastic on that level alone. but that's all there is to it. It's an exercise in style. There's nothing story or character wise here that hasn't been shown a million times in other zombie movies. Of course, the infection gets free, and of course, you've got military people coming and shooting people, trying to contain it in the background as all of our characters slowly walk and run away down streets and whatnot. So it's a short film extended to a feature simply for the technical wow factor. That will be enough for a lot of people. Not for me. Not a big fan of Mads. 35, Double Blind. This little film has flown under the radar. It isn't great, but it's one of those things that is better than it has any right to be. Double Blind has a great premise. A group of people sign up for a pharmaceutical study for 5 days. They have to take some pills and be monitored. Unfortunately, the drug that they are testing has an unforeseen side effect. If any of them fall asleep, they die. They just start bleeding out of their eyeballs and their mouths and the ears, and they just drop dead. So the building goes into lockdown, and this group must stay awake and find a way out before their own hallucinations and mistrust of each other get them killed from lack of sleep. So this is one of those films that was on the precipice of being great, but they couldn't quite get there due to some shoddy writing. It's a little film that gets you engrossed in the initial premise, but then slowly but surely you start glancing down at your phone. You're like, okay, how, you just lose focus on it. A little more imagination and a better use of the hallucinatory aspect of a lack of sleep, and this could have been something really cool. As it is, it doesn't quite reach there. Not awful, but it doesn't quite get there. Missed opportunity is what I would describe Double Blind as. 34, Werewolves. This is one of those movies that you find out is playing at your local theater, and you're like, what? How? Why? Back in 2011, there was a film called Creature that came out in theaters. Had no business having a wide release, but somehow it did. And I distinctly remember going to my local theater to watch this Z-level monster movie full of, nudity and violence and stuff. I was like, how in the world did this get released? That's Werewolves, essentially. Everyone loves Frank Grillo, and here he plays a scientist who is trying to develop a cure for lycanthropy. Basically, last year, the supermoon triggered a dormant DNA in humans and turned 1 billion people into werewolves all of a sudden. And now, purge-like, the remnants of humanity are boarding up their houses, locking up their family members, because the supermoon is about to happen again, and they're trying to prepare this time. So the practical effect werewolves are really cool. So whenever someone turns into a werewolf, they retain their clothing, hairstyles, jewelry. So a punk rocker turns into a werewolf, looks like a punk rocker when he's 8 feet tall, running around chopping people up. So that's all really cool. And so it's like a nice touch to differentiate who the werewolves are, because the werewolves themselves, the actual practical, they all look the same. They're only differentiated by the clothing that they wear. The problem with the film is that it's pretty boring in a lot of it. You would think that the action would keep it going. Grillo is only in about 1/3 of this movie. And there's a bunch of other side stories going on that I did not give a shit about at all. Especially Frank Grillo's sister-in-law. He's trying to fight through the werewolves to get back to her. She's there at this house with her 2 kids alone, so didn't care about any of this stuff. You only want to see Frank Grillo killing werewolves in a movie called Werewolves. So the rest of the movie was trash. 33% of it I loved a lot. The rest of it I was like, ugh, gosh. So they should have just focused on Grillo fighting the werewolves. It would have been awesome. They don't. Lou Diamond Phillips does show up. There is one little kind of cute world building thing here where they are trying to develop a thing called, moon screen, right? Because sunscreen blocks the sun's rays. Moon screen blocks the moon's rays. However, it's not explained. The light coming off the moon is just sun. So why doesn't sunscreen work? Doesn't matter. Moon screen, it's a thing in this movie. Trashy film, you might like it. Werewolves. Number 33, Alien Romulus. Another film that might be a little controversial this low on my list, but it was more disappointing than bad. The early trailers for this film got me really on board. I was like, wow, Fede Alvarez, he makes good movies. This looks like it's going to be a scary, creepy, cool alien movie. And they promised a return to the franchise, and little did I know it would quite literally be a return to the franchise, in the sense that it just rehashed the greatest hits of the Alien franchise in a shiny new package. The film looks great, as most of the Alien movies do, but man, this was so derivative of better stuff. At no point did I was sitting here watching this movie thinking like, I'd rather watch this than any of the other clearly better Alien films in this franchise. Multiple times I'm rolling my eyes throughout this movie, whether it's the cringy return of a classic character with a bad CGI face. I won't spoil who it is, but man, Fetty, I expect better of you. You should have just said, we can't handle this, and let that little plot thing, not be in the finished product. Or the, get away from her, you bitch line by the android. It's so bad. It's just so bad. I do like the zero gravity xenomorph acid scene. That was fun. That is one thing that sticks out in my mind. But this is one of those films that is so slick and polished, you feel like it's good immediately after watching it. But then when you sit on it for a bit, you realize, yeah, that wasn't actually very good. So another big disappointment. 32, In a Violent Nature. Much like Mads, this is more of a technical experiment than a fully realized film. I think most horror fans have had a conversation with their friends about, what would a slasher be like if it was from the killer's perspective? I know I've had that with my friends before. Turns out very, very boring. Now, this flick follows the killer as he slowly walks through the forest, creeps on a bunch of generic teens, and ultimately kills them. Again, I appreciate the attempt, and I think anytime a filmmaker tries something outside of the box, that's worthy of praise and acknowledgement. That being said, just like Mads, I found this to be completely boring and uninteresting. The best slasher films have characters that may be one-dimensional, but they have something unique that makes them memorable. The teens in this aren't given anything like that. Because of the conceit of the film, they're barely in it at all, other than to tell the killer's backstory in a campfire sequence. So all this film really has going for it, other than the uniqueness of the perspective is the kills, which are interspersed here and there and are probably the only thing memorable about it. The kills are fine. The yoga kill, a bit overhyped, if you ask me. I've seen much, much better. But this film just has no spirit to it, if that makes any sense. It's worth a look, if just for what it's trying to do, I guess, though not something I would ever revisit again. 31, Daddy's Head. Now, I really wanted to like this one more than I ended up liking it. The story is about a young boy whose dad dies in a car accident, and he's forced to live with his new stepmother, who he doesn't really have any relationship with. The two of them start becoming terrorized by a strange creature that appears to have the face of the dead dad. It definitely has Babadook vibes in a way, and I dug the uncomfortable relationship between the kid and the stepmom, who's trying to decide whether or not to raise him or just turn him over to foster care. But the monster element of the film is kind of what let me down. I guess I just wasn't sure what was actually going on. Is the creature just a manifestation of grief in dealing with life's troubles? Is it an alien creature from a crashed spaceship? Why is there a giant wooden stick house built in the woods? And maybe that's the point, to not know for sure. But if that's the case, then why give a definitive ending? I won't spoil it, but the end of the movie kind of shows, I won't get into it. So if you've seen it, you kind of know what I'm talking about. But I feel like ambiguous films are things I do like and I do enjoy, but not when they feel unearned, and which is kind of, to me, what Daddy's Head does. It doesn't feel like the ambiguity is earned here. Also, awful title for the movie. Just Daddy's Head. Terrible, terrible. Number 30, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2. The Poohniverse continues, everybody. Now, the first film was kind of universally reviled, but I actually thought it visually had a lot of production value and style and wasn't nearly as bad as society wanted it to be. I have seen a million worse slasher films than the first Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. So I was actually not dreading watching the second film at all. I was actually kind of excited, to be honest. Now, it improves on the first film in basically every way. It turns out that the first film was just a movie made, and the real-world universe characters in this film are reacting to the first film. if that makes sense. So it's kind of like Stab in the Scream franchise, right? Like Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 1 was Stab, and Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2 is Scream. That's anyways, it's confusing, kind of, I know. So this film is actually really gory and has an opening scene kill that actually made me squirm a bit. It's basically, I think it's Winnie the Pooh is grabbing this woman and just breaking all the bones in her arms and legs, and it's effective. In this one, Owl convinces Pooh that they need to take the fight to the humans who have gone around and burned down 100 Acre Wood after the events of the first film, the movie events of the first film. So the problem with these films so far that I've seen, whether it's The Mousetrap or it's both of these Winnie the Pooh movies, is they just aren't trashy enough. And by what I mean by that is, like, making films like this is obviously designed to capitalize on the outrage of trampling on innocent childhood memories. But all of these films so far that I've seen just pull their punches. There's no sex or nudity in these movies. Even though there's a lot of violence, it's so slickly produced, it just doesn't have that sort of disrespectful feel, mood, and tone it needs to really break through. So, like, make one of these in the vein of a dirty 80s New York flick, like a Larry Cohen style flick, and you're going to have something. As it is, it's just too polished, and there's just not enough trashiness in these movies. So, there you go. Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2. Gory. Better than the first Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey. But there you go. Number 29, Humane. The feature-length debut of Caitlin Cronenberg. This film wasn't what I expected it to be from the synopsis. In the future, environmental disasters have forced every country in the world to reduce their populations by 20% in any way they can. So the U.S. has decided to pay people to voluntarily cull themselves in order for their families to get paid out. So if you have a sick family member who's terminally ill, you kill them right now, and the U.S. government will give you $1 million or something that you can then give to your family to make things better, or you can volunteer. So the patriarch of a wealthy family has called his children to a meeting to let them know that he and his wife are volunteering to be part of the 20% that are cold. And the U.S. is running way behind on their target. The movie says they're like at 8% when they got to get to 20 by a certain date. However, the wife doesn't really want to do it, and she runs away, and the company that's contracted to take 2 bodies from this family forces the children to decide amongst themselves who will live or die. Secrets and mistrust amongst the children are then revealed. Anything that the Cronenberg family does, I will watch. They have a very unique perspective on the world, and even if I don't like all of the films, usually the premises of these films are at least interesting and whatnot. This wasn't a bad movie, but I felt that this was kind of like a short film's worth of subject matter stretched to feature length. Most of the characters are unlikable, so you're spending a lot of time with unlikable characters that you're like, I don't care which one of these dies, like they all deserve to die. I wish that they would have made every character in this movie like a good, nice, wholesome character, so that when like the choice, when they're breaking down, trying to decide amongst themselves who to choose here and who needs to die, that actually impacts the audience a little bit more, because you don't want any of them to die. Almost everybody in here, I think I wanted to die. So I hated. By the way, I hated the ending of this film. So especially sort of what is revealed to have actually happened to the antagonist of this movie. Absolutely hated that decision. Not a terrible film. It's Cronenberg. Caitlin Cronenberg. It's a Cronenberg family film, so you want to watch it. I wish that they would have went a different direction on a lot of it. 28, Longlegs. Another controversial selection here. Am I the only one that feels this movie is really overrated? I feel like I am. It looks amazing. Micah Monroe is fine as an FBI agent hunting down a serial killer, but her performance isn't that great in this film, in my opinion. Like, I just didn't think. I mean, check her out in 2023's Watcher to see her really shine acting wise. Here, it's like she's just supposed to be that emotionless government agent, and it just didn't really work for me. Nicolas Cage is fine, I guess. He's just doing over-the-top Cage with some weird makeup. And the film certainly looks good, but I just felt this movie was far more hype than substance. The trailers made it look like a new classic. I think the trailers are kind of all-time horror movie trailers. But the film itself was just super underwhelming to me. I left the theater just being like, oh, that's it. I don't even remember most of the film at this point because it was just kind of like it came in and left, and I was like, I wouldn't classify it as a bad movie or anything. I mean, clearly a lot of people love it, and it's on a lot of people's top 10 list, but it's not something I would ever watch again, and it's not something I'm interested to revisit for sure. Number 27, Infested. This is one of a couple notable killer spider films that were released this year. The other being Sting, which may show up on the list later. Both are similar, dealing with spider horror in apartment complexes, and Infested takes a much more serious horror approach to the subject matter, as it follows a dude named Jacob who purchases a rare spider, and then ends up, I don't even remember how, it ends up multiplying into thousands and turning the apartment complex into a death trap as the residents try to escape. Now, this film does have some really inventive camera work. The director, Sebastian Vanacek, has been hired to do the next Evil Dead movie just based on this film. So it definitely looks cool visually. And I like this one. It's lower on my list than Sting, which for reasons I'll get to later on. But this one, I can't say it's bad. I liked it. This is probably the point in my list where we're going into films that I liked but didn't love. So, I think it overstays its welcome a little bit, but overall, if you're freaked out by spiders, if you have arachnophobia, this is definitely going to hit the spot for you. So yeah, Infested. There you go. Number 26, Stop Motion. This is probably the most difficult film for me to rank on this list. I like the film, but I didn't love it. It centers around a stop-motion animator who is helping her arthritic mother create her final sort of like magnum opus. The mom is overbearing, not allowing her to bring in any of her own ideas, keeps telling her like you screw up if she moves the thing just wrong. But after her mother dies, she tries to finish the film with the help of a young girl who tells her how to finish the story. And the film is basically about this young girl, saying this is the story you need to tell, and the lead actor's kind of resisting, and then ultimately doing what the girl wants, and then creating a new stop motion sort of film. Performances are all very, very good. The stop motion effects are awesome. Love stop motion. I'm going to talk about a stop motion film that actually hit my top 10, so stick around for that. But I don't know why, but for whatever reason, this film just didn't stick with me like it should. And this is more like just a feeling. I can't point to anything specific about this movie that I really was like, they did this bad, or they did this incorrectly or poor. I just found myself like having to refer back to the plot while putting together this list. I couldn't really remember what was going on all that well. I mean, it's like it just didn't stick with me. Even though I feel like it's a good movie, I don't know, this thing just didn't stick for whatever reason. And we always have films like that, right? That other people really, really love, but you're just like, I don't know, there's something squishy about this one that just didn't work. It's a film I appreciate quite a bit, especially in how it deals with art and the creation of art, where ideas come from. And on a different day, it may be higher on my list, but I'm not willing to put it any lower than this because I don't think it's bad. But I can't put it any higher because clearly it didn't do enough for me that I really love the thing. So it's worth a look if you're interested in meditative horror, but this one just didn't work. Number 25, Blink Twice. The directorial debut of Zoe Kravitz. Blink Twice is a really good concept, hampered a bit by a really rough first 40 minutes. Now, the basic premise here is a couple of women get invited to a tech billionaire's mansion mansion on an island to spend a vacation. There's a bunch of other rich people there. Everything seems to be fine until the girls start realizing that they have been forgetting things, such as how they got various bruises. Now, I won't spoil it, but let's just say it's what you would expect a bunch of rich dudes to be doing with no consequences and a bunch of pretty attractive women who can't remember anything the next day. And I really wanted to love this film, but man, those first 40 minutes are tough to get through. Most of these characters start out super annoying, and it just seems to take forever for it to get to the point. Now, it's not difficult to figure out what is happening. Rich sex freaks are just the default at this point, and the last act of the film, Kravitz turns it into a kind of like a revenge flick, but it just falls a bit flat. Channing Tatum is great as the villain here, and Naomi Ackie is really awesome as the lead, and I really wanted to like this one. I think if around 15 to 20 minutes of the initial 40 had been cut out and more development given to some of these female characters, it would have hit more. This kind of subject matter has hit harder in other horror films that are much more visceral. This is clearly a big budget Hollywood thing, so when you find out what's actually been going on, it's not surprising, but it kind of pulls its punches in a way in terms of what it actually shows, where other horror films, they just go there for that more visceral, like, holy shit. Still a horrifying concept, and I appreciate what Kravitz was trying to do with this, but didn't quite pull it off, in my opinion. 24, A Quiet Place, Day 1. John Krasinski does not return as a director of this one, and rather than continue the story with A Quiet Place Part 3, which is what I wanted to see or would have preferred to have seen, the filmmakers decided to do a prequel to show what happens on the titular first day. Now, the story centers around Lupita Nyong'o's character, who is terminally ill with cancer, as she and another dude get trapped in New York City when the meteors hit and the alien creatures first arrive. So, even though it's not what I wanted, this is a good film if you're okay with like a very small character-driven story about the friendship between two people. It opens with a big sequence, but the rest of the film is really small and character-driven. Lupita Nyong'o is really good, as always, because she's a great actress, and the ending hits a really nice emotional chord. You won't learn anything new about the aliens or what the response was by world governments or whatever, other than like, okay, some fighter jets blew up all the bridges leading into Manhattan and stuff like that. So it's clear that governments know something is happening or trying to do something. But you don't. My point is, you don't get to learn anything new about the aliens, why they're here, or anything like that. So if you're going into it for that, you're going to be disappointed. But it is another good entry of what's turning out to be a really great and possibly underappreciated horror franchise at this point. I thought the first two A Quiet Place movies are really, really good. This one's really, really solid. So I'm looking forward to the next A Quiet Place film. Number 23, Abigail. This film was ruined by the marketing. They straight up revealed in the trailer that the title character of Abigail was a vampire, which I wonder what my reaction would have been had I gone into this completely blind and that had been like a reveal. That being said, I thought this film was fun. I thought the characters were properly differentiated from one another. They had their own motivations and desires, and they kind of point that out throughout the course of the film, which I thought was really, really good. The guy who looks like Elon Musk was completely distracting. I'm not the only one that thinks that guy looks just like Elon Musk, right? I don't want to look at Elon Musk's ugly face, and no offense to this guy, it was just Elon Musk face to me constantly, and it took me out of the film every time I saw him. The little girl who played Abigail was good. It was overly bloody and fun and in on the joke kind of way. I think my main complaint with the film is that it was just overly long. I don't think it needed to be anywhere near as long as it ended up being. The ending was very easy to see coming. I know they wanted audiences to be shocked by who shows up at the end, but as soon as they started dropping hints to a father figure, I knew where this film was going. But yeah, Abigail, fun time, too long. That seems to be like the thing with horror films recently, is just, why are you so long? You don't need to be as long as you think you need to be. Number 22, Apartment 7A. Okay, now we're starting to get into the films that I think are worth a look. Obviously, it's going to be worth a look more and more as we get higher up the list. But Apartment 7A, critically lambasted. This is a film that did not get anybody to. I haven't seen anybody say that this movie is great in any review, or I haven't seen it on any top 10 lists. But I'm putting it here because I think that it's worth a look. So, a dancer horrifically breaks her ankle during a performance and struggles to get her career back. This was put out by Platinum Dunes and actually produced by John Krasinski, amazingly enough, and is a prequel to Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby. Now, I think most people completely wrote it off for that reason alone. I mean, who needs a prequel to Rosemary's Baby, right? It's a classic film. No one's asking for that. However, I thought this was really good. It centers around the Terry character from the original film and what she went through with the Castavets. So if you remember, Terry was the character in the original Rosemary's Baby that Mia Farrow finds has committed suicide out on the street and jumped from the window. That's the character that this one is based around. So Julia Garner is great as Terry and is one of the best actors we have working right now, in my opinion. This movie's worth watching just for her performance alone. And yes, she's playing the Silver Surfer, so keep crying about it, whiners. But she is great, and I'm sure she's going to be great as the Silver Surfer as well. This film is beautifully directed by Natalie Erica James, who I was completely unfamiliar with before this. I'm definitely going to be checking out other works of hers. Now, your mileage on this film will totally be dependent on whether you can be okay with essentially seeing a Rosemary's Baby remake. Yes, it's a prequel, but the story is basically the same. It's the bad guys of Rosemary's Baby trying to do the exact same thing. They succeed with Mia Farrow, and they don't succeed here with the Terry character. Right? I'm someone totally okay with that. And I appreciate this film for what it is. I love the period piece. I love all the costumes, how it looks, the performances. I thought it was really, really good. Thumbs up on Apartment 7A for me. Number 21, Speak No Evil. When is it too soon to do a remake? Now, this film stars James McAvoy and is a remake of a 2022 Danish film, I think. I think it's Danish. The story involves a family that gets invited to spend the weekend with McAvoy's family, and it quickly becomes apparent that McAvoy is not quite the nice guy he appears to be. So, unpopular opinion here. I think the US version is better in most respects than the original film, and here's why. The original film has a ton of really stupid decision making by the protagonist family that leaves you kind of like screaming at the television. The US version attempts to clear all of that up with more logical explanations, and I'll give you an example. In the original film, there's this ridiculous sex scene that makes no sense. Like, there are two main protagonists, the husband and the wife. They're already experiencing all this weird shit with this family. They're uncomfortable. Their daughter is sleeping in another room with the child of this family, and the daughter starts crying and asking for the mom. And the mom and the guy and the dad decide to have sex, which then leads to something that happens with the daughter that ends up being a catalyst for the rest of the movie. That doesn't happen here. So, like, the US version, something similar happens, but it's not like a sex scene going on. It's an argument between the mom and the dad, and they don't hear the kid. So it's a more plausible explanation as to why a series of events happens that sort of leads to what happens with their child. To me, a much bigger improvement. I was like, okay, but it's much easier to buy. So the first 2/3 of this film are basically a shot-for-shot remake of that sort of Danish original. It's the last third that is completely different, and it's where people are going to say, yes, I like it, or no, I absolutely hate it. Now, the original film has a very shocking ending that the US version does not do. So if you like the original's ending, you are going to hate the Hollywood version of Speak No Evil. You'll hate it. And I would not blame you for that. So the US remake loses something because of the Hollywood ending, but it also improves things in the first 2/3 that make a lot more sense. So, for me, the Hollywood version worked, and I liked McAvoy's performance in this quite a bit. He's great. But again, if you're a diehard sort of like the original is the best, I can't argue with that. Number 20, Heretic. This film is going to start a streak of films that almost got there, meaning they start so strong and then they do not stick the landing, which is a shame. Heretic lives and dies on its performances. Hugh Grant is fantastic, as are the two co-leads, Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East. They play these Mormon missionaries. It's rare that a movie like this can be engaging when the first half or so is just dialogue. Back and forth, posing questions about the meaning of faith, dissecting what makes your core principle belief system. It's a super great setup, and the dialogue really works, I think, in a lot of ways to at least get you thinking. Where the film falters is like in the last act, where it doesn't seem to have the guts to take a stand one way or the other. I kind of agree with Hugh Grant's ultimate big picture premise on what religion kind of is ultimately. But rather than be sort of like bold and assert that, the film uses ambiguity as an excuse to not give any definitive answers. Whereas I would have preferred for the filmmakers to come down one way or the other. Call it the frailty effect, right? That's another film that deals with questioning of faith. What is real? What is not? Should I believe this? Is everything I've been taught my whole life real? Or is it, not? But frailty decidedly comes down on one side of the film, where it's like, I won't spoil it, but it has, at the end of that film there is something that is actually real. One side is true. Heretic doesn't quite do that. I wish Heretic would have come down on did the opposite of what frailty does, but it didn't. Still, it's a fun watch. The performances are great. This is a thumbs up A24 film, I think. Keeps that A24 track record alive for me right now. Number 19, Late Night with the Devil. We do have a review of this up on Outpost Unknown. A bunch of us got together. We all watched this and we did a review. So check out that review if you want to go a lot more detail into this. But this is a film that easily should have made my top 10 if not for the ending. Which I think is pretty crappy. Now, this one's about a talk show host who made a deal with the devil for fame and fortune, presented in sort of like a found footage behind the scenes of his final broadcast, 1970s talk show broadcast. Very engaging from the very beginning. David Dastmalchian is awesome, as always. But man, this ending is just so wacky and out of sorts with how the film sort of progresses. It's just a bit of a downer. It's just one of those things like, oh, God, could have been great, much like Heretic, an otherwise really excellent film that couldn't quite get there. Like I said, check out the full review here on Outpost Unknown if you want to hear all of our thoughts on why that ending sucks so bad. Number 18, Sting. The other killer spider film entry in 2024. Sting is the name given to the titular spider, who begins growing at an alarming rate and killing residents of an apartment building. So I like this one much more than Infested. I thought the characters were better and it felt more like a fun monster film romp, which was a consistent thing I was looking for in horror films this year. I don't know why, but I just wanted fun monster movies, and I think I was kind of over sort of really serious heavy stuff for the most part. So a lot of these films I probably enjoyed. Like, if someone were to tell me Infested is technically a better movie than Sting, I wouldn't disagree with them. Like I said at the very beginning of this, these are just my favorites. These are my personal tastes. This is what hit better for me this year. And I like this one. I like the dynamic between the little girl and her dad. The film leans into like the comedic much more than Infested, which typically I'm not a big fan of, but for some reason this year comedic stuff just kind of landed with me more, and I think it succeeds in what it's trying to do better than Infested. So Sting, I like this one. Check this one out. Number 17, Arcadian. Nicolas Cage making another appearance on my list. We are in the Cage Renaissance era, similar to the McConaughey Renaissance about 10 years back, but I think the Cage one just keeps going and going and going. I feel like McConaughey's was much smaller, but Nicolas Cage just keeps knocking out weird genre films every year that seem to be good. This one involves a post-apocalyptic future where he and his two sons eke out a living on their farm. At night, these weird monsters come out to hunt humans, and when one of his sons doesn't make it home, he heads out to find him. I feel like a broken record at this point, but I was really into monster movies in 2024, and this was one of the better ones. The monsters are pretty unique looking, and though they are hampered a bit by lower budget CG, in most cases they don't look too sci-fi channel-ish. There are a couple shots here and there, but for the most part I could get on board with the CG monsters. This film was clearly influenced by A Quiet Place, but if you look past that, you'll have a fun time with it. The way the film ends makes it seem like a sequel could be on the table, and I'd be down to check one out for sure. So if Arcadian 2 pops up, I'm definitely putting on my list of things to watch. So, good flick. Number 16, Cuckoo. This was one of the final films on my list this year to definitely check out for this list, and I'm glad that I did. This one involves a teenage girl who moves to the Alps with her father, stepmother, and little sister and becomes embroiled in a very strange set of circumstances. To say too much about what is going on would be to give a bunch of stuff away, and I'm going to try to keep it very, very generic here. Let's just say it gets real weird when you realize what is actually going on. Now, there have been a lot of really great female performances in horror this year, but I thought Hunter Schafer delivered one of the best. She goes through a crazy amount of shit in this movie, and should be recognized for sure. This is another film that kind of focuses on familial relationships, and I thought the sister dynamic paid off really, really well, especially at the end. If I had to critique the film, it's that it's so weird, and the ultimate reveal of what's going on is so unusual that it can be difficult to kind of discern immediately what exactly is going on through a lot of it. That's part of the point of the movie, but I don't think the filmmakers completely executed that in a coherent manner at the end when the big explanations of everything happening is going on. But still, I thought it was pretty cool. Loved how it was filmed. Check out Cuckoo. Number 15, Lowlifes. All right, we're getting to the nitty gritty here, closing in on the top 10. Now, every once in a while, you check out a film that you know nothing about, just randomly put on, and it surprises the hell out of you. And maybe it's because I had zero expectations for this, since it's a Tubi original film. Yes, Tubi. Tubi is making horror films, everyone. And the cover of this is just a girl with like a bloody lip or something. Looks completely uninteresting. Like you would not see the cover and immediately be like, ooh, and hit play. I did. And I was kind of floored by how much I enjoyed this movie. This one, I don't want to spoil anything, but the basic premise is a road tripping family comes across some worrisome hillbillies, like their RV is kind of breaking down, and they encounter these really creepy hillbillies who are asking for help. They're like, hey, can you take my buddy back to the house? I'll stay by my car. This family is kind of like, I don't know. Seems like a bad idea to take this guy back to the house. But they do, and we get the movie Lowlifes. This is filled with tons of fun performances, some wild twists, manic lunacy. This feels like a throwback to something I would rent in the 90s, not the 80s. 80s had a different vibe and feel. This feels like a 90s video VHS rental. And if I would have watched this with my high school friends, we would have loved it. Something like... it's not in the same vibe of this, but something like Cube. I remember renting Cube on VHS. You didn't know what the hell it was. You watch it with your friends, and you're like, holy shit, that was really fun, and it just sticks with you. It sticks with you. I could see this being the kind of movie that a 13-year-old would check out on Tubi and say, this makes me want to make movies. I feel like it's got that kind of vibe to it. Is it a great movie? No. Absolutely not. It's not great, but it's a fun movie. And sometimes when you kind of stumble across something like this and it feels like it's yours, you want to spread the gospel, that can go a long way. So I am spreading the gospel of Lowlifes. Check it out. Leave a comment down below what you thought of it. You tell me I'm totally off base. That's fine too. Number 14, Nosferatu. Okay, This might be controversial. Not in my top 10, folks. I waited. I waited to see this movie before I started putting this list together, and it did not make my top 10. So, Robert Eggers returns with an adaptation of F.W. Murnau's 1922 German expressionist silent film with a dash of Werner Herzog's 1979 adaptation with Klaus Kinski as the titular bad guy. So, like I said, this is a film I waited on to make the list. Is it good? Yes, absolutely. Do I think it's a masterpiece in which no other horror films this year can compare? No, absolutely not. Now, on a technical level, there's nothing really that can be said negatively about this movie. The cinematography is gorgeous. The acting is fantastic, specifically by Lily Rose Depp. An incredible year for women in horror, for sure. In the atmosphere of the gothic sort of romance and horror, nailed perfectly. So Robert Eggers set out to make a gothic horror film that's visually stunning. Nails it. Perfect. So why didn't it make my top 10? Honestly, because I didn't feel anything when I finished watching this movie other than, yep, that was a fine telling of a story I've seen dozens of times. It is good, but I wouldn't call this even as good as Herzog's adaptation in 1979. I prefer that one to this. Now, some of the films coming up on my list actually made me feel some sort of emotional response after viewing. That's why this is a personal, these are just my favorite list rather than these are the definitive top 10 best movies of the year sort of thing. This one just didn't, man. It wasn't a letdown because I expected it to be good, and it was. I've just seen this story done as good or better multiple times before, and there wasn't anything new here that I could really latch onto and made me think afterwards and dwell on it and be like, oh, it's just a good movie. It's a good movie that didn't have that extra oomph that I needed it to have. Number 13, VHS Beyond. There's a lot of entries in the VHS series, and most of them I can take or leave. But Beyond interested me because it specifically deals with space alien stories, which is something near and dear to my heart. Now, ever since the ending of Fire in the Sky scarred me for life when I was a kid, aliens have always been a great mine of horror stories. Like, I just want to go in there and sort of chip out that ore and hopefully it's a polish it up and get something really, really good. So I love alien sort of like abduction films and things of that nature. Nearly all of the short films in this were either good to great. But there is one that sucks, which I'll get to. So one particular short film, I'm not going to go through every short film in here. It's a 2-hour movie. I think there's 5 or 6 total, and we'd be here forever. Leave a comment if you'd like me to do an actual review of VHS Beyond for the channel. But Live and Let Dive was a cool short. I thought it was super cool. Really hit me. It's basically a group of college friends skydiving and being intercepted by an alien spacecraft. And the shenanigans that happen as this alien and these people land and encounter each other in this horrible thing. Super cool how that was done. I liked pretty much all of them. The opening's like a Resident Evil style thing where these people are possessed by aliens and they're going in and shooting them down. All of it is cool, with the exception of one short story, Fur Babies. And I think Justin Long wrote this short. And it involves a couple doggy daycare providers like turning people into animal-human hybrids. It's essentially Tusk. And it's easily the worst film in this anthology. It has nothing to do with aliens like the others. And if it does, I didn't see any obvious connection to it, so it failed on that level. I hated this. Hated it. I originally had VHS Beyond in my top 10, but had to remove it because of the stupid Justin Long short film that was in here that just brought it down. It dragged it out of the top 10 for me. Still, it's good. Watch VHS Beyond. Just skip the stupid Fur Babies installment done by Justin Long. Oh, God. Number 12, Azrael. Now, Rachel recommended this one to me as I was binge watching as many horror films as I could before the end of the year, and I am very glad she did because I had not heard of it before she told me about it. So, Azrael is after the rapture has occurred, the surviving humanity is sort of hunted down by these like zombie-like creature things. Samara Weaving plays Azrael, who used to be in this cult that cut their vocal cords out. It was like one of those things that they're just silent, and you got to be silent because the zombies hear you and they come running. So they cut out their vocal cords. Eventually, Samara Weaving and her husband, they leave this cult. They try to escape it and live their own life, but the cult comes back, basically kidnaps the husband. She gets away, and the movie is about her trying to get back to her husband and save the husband. Now, the film has like no dialogue at all, essentially. I think there's one sequence that has some dialogue in it, just one thing. Greater world building that this cult is not sort of a widespread thing. It's like they are their own thing. But other than that, there's no dialogue, and it is just Samara Weaving's performance, which kind of like the entire thing rests on. And a film like that solely rests on her shoulders. And she's awesome. She's absolutely great in this. Her entire performance is based on her body language and facial expressions, which run the gamut throughout this. Again, another great female performance, broken record this year. Props to the batshit crazy finale. I kind of want a sequel to this film just to see what happens. Because it has a cool ending, and Samara Weaving's character kind of changes in a way that I'd love to see what happens in a sequel to Azrael. So really cool. Didn't quite crack the top 10, but definitely worth a look. Number 11, Carved. Now this is a Hulu original film, which has a pretty terrible Rotten Tomatoes score. Just like Apartment 7A, I seem to dig a lot of the movies that did not get well reviewed this year, but I dug the hell out of Carved. This is a good old-fashioned monster movie full of fun kills that centers on a chemical spill turning pumpkins into a pumpkin patch into sentient killing machines. Now when the pumpkins see a carving contest, they go on a revenge spree, murdering as many people as possible. I'm just as shocked as you are that I put this flick this high on my list, but I loved it. For whatever reason, this film just hit me in the feels. I was surprised by the charm of it. I liked the goofy theater kids and the hamminess of their dialogue, and I especially liked the pumpkins going on a kill spree. Who doesn't like a killer pumpkin? This film will win no awards, and I don't think most people would put this anywhere near a top 10, let alone number 11 on their list of horror films of the year, but I don't give a shit. I liked it, and it was cheesy fun for me, and it didn't take itself seriously, and it gave me a bunch of smiles, so I'm putting it high. Number 11, Carved. Number 10, Blackout. A new Larry Fessenden directed film is must-see viewing for me. They are so few and far between, and he's such a student of horror history that all of his films, though they rarely have much of a budget at all, they punch well above their weight class, just on sheer gumption. And that's the case with Blackout, his ode to classic Universal werewolf monster movies of the 1940s, sort of combined with his sharp insight into environmental issues. He's always got environmental stuff in his films, and this one is no different. In this, an artist named Charlie, living in the cheekily named Talbot Falls, realizes he is a werewolf that is murdering people every full moon. He decides to say goodbye to his friends and family before committing suicide to save them from his eventual wrath. This is probably the lowest budgeted film on this list. It doesn't have the professional sheen and look of anything that would be released theatrically. It's just a no-budget meditation on how a man comes to grips with what he is and what he wants to be remembered as to his friends and family. I would imagine that most people listening to this list are questioning why I would put this as high as I have, and would probably not like the slow pacing and relative lack of horror in it. But this was a slow burn that was right up my alley, and I really love Fessenden films. I just love how he makes his movies. The guy gets it. He's a unique voice, and if you like this, make sure you check out The Last Winter from 2006. Maybe that should be a Forgotten Horrors episode down the line. But Blackout, it's one of those films that, hey, it deserves to be seen by horror fans, just like a Eggers film deserves to be seen by a horror fan. So does Larry Fessenden, and it's just low budget. Get over it. Number 9, The Inheritance. Classic horror film setup. A rich patriarch gathers his family at his mansion and tells them they must keep him alive through the night, otherwise their inheritance will all be donated to charity. Ends up one of the funnest films of the year for me. I didn't know what to expect going into this. I think I had just seen... I was looking at a list of horror movies released in 2024, trying to catch up on what I might have missed. I just saw something called The Inheritance. I was like, never even heard of it. Let's watch it. Loved it. The cinematography in this is really good. Finding out what is coming for the patriarch and who he can and cannot trust is really entertaining. There are some really cool effects work, in particular a character coming out of a painting that I was impressed by. I was like, man, that just looks cool. It's a late entry. I think it came out on Hulu around Christmas, but I'm glad I got to check it out. My main criticism of this would be that it's not at all original, but that didn't prevent me from disliking it. Not a super long film. It's lean, and once the supernatural shenanigans start up, it's a really fun ride. So definitely check out The Inheritance. Number 8, The First Omen. Holy hell, where did this come from? You know, much like Rosemary's Baby, if you would have asked me before I saw this, do you want to see an Omen prequel? I would have been like, absolutely not. But both Apartment 7A and The First Omen are like shining examples of prequels done right. So when people come at me like, oh, prequels suck, no, there are no such things as good prequels. Number one, I'm going to say Andor. But for horror, I'm going to definitely bring up Apartment 7A and The First Omen. Yet another sterling example of a female acting performance in the genre this year. Man, Nell Tiger-Free is awesome in this movie. She goes through every possible emotion you could think of, including a huge nod to Isabelle Adjani in Possession. If you've never seen Possession with Sam Neill, go check out that movie. This film was just so much better and has so much more to say than something like Immaculate, that they really aren't even in the same league or weight class, so to speak, as one another. Stellar film that makes you interested in revisiting the original Omen films for sure. Big thumbs up to The First Omen. Number 7, Smile 2. I really liked the first Smile, and when the sequel was announced, I was naturally like, how can you possibly expand on this concept? I mean, the concept is what it is. It turns out you can't. I was correct. You cannot really expand upon it, but you just got to make it bigger and better and bolder, you know, and which is what Smile 2 does. In this one, pop star Naomi Scott puts on a hell of a performance in paranoia and fear as the smile demon monster, whatever it is, comes after her. The reason this is so high on my list is, number one, this film was the only film this year that actually gave me goosebumps and creeped me out in a number of scenes. There's something about these movies and the way that the protagonist just cannot escape them that sort of gets to me. I don't know. Something really effective with the kills in this as well. I mean, if I had a complaint, it's that it doesn't escape the I know where this is going feeling, right? So you kind of figure out right away how this story is going to end, and I can sympathize with critics who say the last act of this movie made them feel cheated and how it plays out. I see that criticism, but it didn't bother me. Just the fact that I got some semblance of being scared puts this real high on my ranking. So if someone were to tell me Smile 2 is not that great, and they put it really low on their list because it's just a rehash, it's the same thing as the first, I couldn't argue with them on that. I concede that point to them. But again, I was actually creeped out when I watched this one, and that goes a long way for me. It overrides sort of the lack of originality with the concept. It made me happy to be kind of scared and creeped out. So, boom, let's go to my top 10. Don't give a shit. Number 6, The Primevals. In no scenario is this film going to be in anybody's top 10 list but mine. There is a crazy backstory to this film. And in a nutshell, this was a stop-motion animator passion project from David Allen. 50 years he was making this movie, or working on this movie in some form or fashion. So in the 90s, Charles Band funded the project with Full Moon, and all the principal photography was shot and completed. And then Allen spent years slowly putting together the stop-motion animation required to complete it. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1999, and the film was left unfinished for roughly 30 years. Charles Band found a way to get the money and convinced Alan's animation friends to sort of help finish it out. I think they did a Indiegogo or Kickstarter campaign at one point, raised $50,000-$60,000, and then David Allen's friends and the people that he trained in stop motion then completed the film for him. The result is a film out of time. It is a true full moon 90s film from their heyday that made me feel all the love that I had for that company when I was a teenager. The stop motion animation is incredible, and no film got me happier this year than seeing this finished product. And again, when I'm putting together a favorite film of the year list, this isn't going to win any great awards, maybe a stop motion award or something like that, but in terms of great films, no. It's just a goofy, full moon horror film literally from the 90s, but man, did this feel good to watch. It just felt great to watch, and it's going in my top 10, and I feel no shame about placing it here. Number 5, Milk and Cereal. This is a found footage film made for $800 and made by a couple prank channel YouTubers, and I was floored by how good this film is. I was unfamiliar with this prank channel. This was written, directed, and stars Curry Barker, and it centers around him and his friend Seven, played by Cooper Tomlinson, as they play progressively unsettling pranks on one another until it is not clear what is real and what is not. Like, is this actually a prank? As things progressively get crazier and crazier. Awesome premise, and at only about an hour in length, this is the shortest film on the list, and easily one of the most effective. What makes this work is the naturalness to all of it. Barker and Tomlinson essentially play themselves, and it really feels like you're watching something that's real. There's a twist about halfway through that I won't spoil, but only works because the acting is so good, and these two people are so believable as friends to one another. Found footage is still a viable subgenre in horror. Some people may not be able to get over the fact that, who would keep a camera rolling during this? That's largely overcome by the fact that these are YouTubers who literally film everything for their channel. So I like the found footage, and I don't get hung up on those sorts of nitpicks with the structure or the foundation of the subgenre itself. I don't care. I like found footage. It's called suspension of disbelief. I'm fine with it. I can do it in a million other movies. I can do it in a found footage film. And part of this subgenre is just going along for the ride and being okay with suspending your disbelief and the artificiality of all of it. So definitely give Milk and Cereal a look. It has a great ending. It's free on YouTube. There's no reason not to watch it. You have seen a million horror films that are terrible, and this one's actually good. Go support these YouTubers. Real fun time. Number 4, Oddity. This was my number 2 up until about 2 or 3 days ago when I got a few other films in last minute. I adore this film. The weirdness of it, the creepiness of it, the performances in it. It's one of those films whose setup just gets you engrossed from the very beginning. A woman alone at her house gets a knock on her door, and there's this creepy dude who tells her, "You gotta let me in. I saw someone come into your house. You're gonna need my help. Do you let this man in or not?" So, then fast forwards a year, we find out that the woman was murdered, and we get introduced to her blind twin sister. She's the owner of this small cursed antiquity shop and decides she's going to go figure out the mystery. Now, I just loved everything about this film. The cinematography, the characters, all of it. A valid critique of this film, even for me, is that the mystery is not hard to solve at all. You know exactly who murdered the sister almost from the first time this person walked into frame. I knew, okay, this guy killed the wife. This is how it's all going to be figured out. But for whatever reason, I did not care. I wanted to see the journey of how it all went down and how the blind sister was going to uncover it. That was the point to me, not the fact that it's going to be obvious what happened to the sister and who was behind everything. The journey was the important part to me. So, great performances all around. The wooden man, such a cool horror prop, and the genuinely creepy things that are done with it. It just seems so ominous. I would love to have that as a prop just sitting in the corner. That would just be awesome. Love this film. Love it. So if I love this film, absolutely love it, and you can hopefully tell that by how I'm talking about it, The top 3 are coming up next, and they must be even better. Number 3, The Devil's Bath. 2024 was a peak year for religious horror films, and this one was the best. I mean, I have this and The First Omen in there. I didn't think anything could surpass the First Omen for me. The Devil's Bath surpasses it. A period piece, I think it takes place in the 1700s. It's based on a true story, telling the story of a poor peasant named Agnes who marries into a family she doesn't know. She quickly falls into this severe depression based on her surroundings. She has a mother-in-law who does not like her. Her new husband shows no interest in her sexually and thus will not give her a child, which is something that she desperately wants. The other villagers shun her due to her inability to assist with the daily chores as required. And it's based on, now, minor spoilers here, or spoilers just in general for this. I have to, in order to talk about it properly, I kind of have to explain how this film came to be. And it's based on an actual epidemic, so spoilers people, fast forward to the next one if you don't want to hear it yet. It's based on a true epidemic that occurred in the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe called suicide by proxy. Basically, because suicide was a sin that could not be absolved, women would kill children who were considered innocent via religious reasons because they couldn't sin. You know, they have their original sin, but they can't sin like an adult can. And so these women would kill their children or kill other people's children in order to, and then turn themselves in. Say, hey, I murdered a kid. They would be set for execution. The priest or the minister would come and hear their confession and absolve them. So then their suicide was being executed. And watching this, I mean, this film is pretty harrowing in terms of the themes. Not necessarily in all of the stuff it shows. It's not something super graphic. I mean, it's got graphic scenes in it, don't get me wrong, but it's more about the premise and what actually happened in reality, and what actually, the circumstances that these women were put in that would make them feel religiously that they had to kill a baby or a small child in order for God to sort of hear their confession. Like, it's not enough for them to just confess to God themselves and kill themselves. The structure of religion requires them to have to do a horrible sin to allow them to sort of commit suicide. And man, the actress here, the Anya Plashk, I think is her name. If that's how, I apologize if I pronounced it incorrectly. This is like the first time she's ever been in a movie. She was a pop star or whatever and was going to do the score for this movie and read the script and decided, hey, can I audition for it? And man, she nails it. She nails it. I left this film saying, like, honestly thinking to myself, what would the world be like without all of the horror that has been wrought because of religion? And this is a very sad and horrific film made more impactful because it was true. The Devil's Bath, whew, powerful film, powerful. Number 2, Exuma. Wow. A South Korean film centering around a group of what I'll just call paranormal researchers for ease of this discussion, even though that's not what they actually are. These people are hired to rid a family of a curse. So after digging up the grave of a family member and performing a ritual, they believe they have ended the curse, only for something more wild to appear. Now, the first hour of this movie feels like nothing special. It's good. But it's just your typical South Korean ghost film that you've seen dozens and dozens of times. However, there is a thing that happens a little over an hour in where our protagonists think everything's good, and that makes you go, wow. One of the coolest horror villains I've seen in a while for this genre makes a grand appearance, and I really love this film. Loved it. And I want to be careful not to spoil anything. In probably just saying there's something that happens a little over an hour again is a spoiler, but all of the little world building they do, the rituals, and especially the real life history that they bring into this movie, when you realize like what the bad guy is, and more importantly why the protagonists are so scared shitless of it, it makes a lot of sense, and it all wraps up super satisfyingly. This movie made me immediately start reading about South Korean history. Asian ghost films are so impactful because their society believes in these things, and it just shows in Exuma. These are filmmakers who are like, we believe in this stuff, we believe in this stuff, and our society's horror ghosts are very, very different from another society's horror entities. I'll say that, entities. And how do South Koreans deal with another culture's entity? And why are they so scared? And why is there so much trauma? That's what I'll say to this. Awesome. This movie is so, so cool. You might not feel like it's worth sticking through that first hour, but man, stick with it, because the reveal of what this thing is and what's going on. Because it's a 2 hour and 15-minute movie. It's a long watch, and it's subtitled. So it's like one of those films where you got to really pay attention to it. Pay attention to it. It's good. Number 2 on my list this year, Exuma. Number 1, The Substance. There really was no other choice for number 1 for me. Exuma and The Devil's Bath came close. Oddity came close. But the only thing that had the chance to usurp this was Nosferatu, which is what I was waiting for on the list. I was waiting to watch Nosferatu just to see if it could somehow usurp The Substance. Didn't even come close. Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley are so great in this movie, and this film is so batshit insane as it descends into madness and body horror. This is a must-watch for any horror fan, and shame on you if you went through 2024 without watching The Substance and without supporting this movie. I would go so far as to say that this is going to be considered a classic film down the line. This is going to be revisited by horror fans and historians. I still remember how I felt when I left the theater. I saw this in Vancouver, Washington at the Kiggins Theater. It's a classic theater in downtown Vancouver. And my fiance and I walked out of this movie not really knowing what I was getting into, or what we were getting into. I was kind of floored. I was just stunned. Like, my mouth was just... I didn't know what to say when we first left this. I was like, wow. So good. And man, Demi Moore, it's so cool to see an actor who used to be popular, like in the 90s. She was huge with Ghost and G.I. Jane and all of those movies. And then she just completely dropped off the radar. If you were to ask me what was the last movie you saw Demi Moore in, I was like, geez, I don't know. Wasn't she like in Charlie's Angels in the 90s or something like that? Like, I wouldn't be able to tell you something I've seen her in the last 20 years. And then she just shows up and knocks it out of the park. This film's excess, and there is a lot of excess, is its strength. It hits you with such a sensory overload of editing, sound, and gore. It's one of the few films that truly leaves a person speechless after they see it. Absolutely deserving of the best horror films of 2024. My number 1 goes to The Substance. So there you have it, everybody. That's my, 46 horror films I saw in 2024. I don't know how long this video is going to end up being. Let me see how long I've been recording here. An hour and a half. Jeez. So, yeah. That's it. Leave a comment down below. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Again, some of these films I can say are objectively, like, I can't disagree with someone putting Nosferatu in their top 10. Wasn't in mine. I understand if someone's saying Blackout shouldn't be in anyone's top 10 list. Yeah, I agree. But I'm not trying to make a list for the objectively good best movies. It's just the movies that I like the best. My favorites of the year. Ranked in order. I've never actually done this before. I saw another YouTuber, I think Cody Leach, had done a few of these, so shout out to him. Go check out his channel. He does a lot of really cool horror videos, rankings and tier lists and stuff. And I saw him do a video, kind of inspired me to do mine. So first time I've done it. We'll see how it goes. Let me know in the comments, what do you agree with? What do you disagree with? What did I forget? Was there something other than the ones I listed at the very top, like Strange Darling, that I just didn't see? But yeah, Happy New Year, everyone. We look forward to giving you some more videos from Outpost Unknown. We appreciate all the people who have liked and subscribed. We're over 1,000 subscribers now, which is cool. Kind of mind-blowing that there's people out there that listen to us and care about any of our opinions on anything. So we got a lot of cool stuff coming up. We will see you in 2025.